Hi, this is Paul, and this is Rough Draft for Sunday, where I run through the current version of my Sunday sermon. We've been looking at culture wars and the Judean culture war, and how Jesus disrupted the Judean culture war, and how he won the war against the Roman Empire, and it took 300 years, and even then it was complicated. And we looked at, and I keep bringing us back to Acts chapter 1, where we sort of have insight into what's on the mind of the disciples. What do they really want from Jesus? Because after the crucifixion and the resurrection, they stop and they say, Lord, are you at this time going to restore the kingdom to Israel? What did they want? Well, it's pretty much what all of us want in our political frames. Are you going to return everything to the way I think it should be? Now, this is pretty basically what they imagine Messiah is, what they think Messiah is. Luke 9, I'll keep reading. We've been sort of going through the Gospel of Luke. Once when Jesus was praying in private and his disciples were with him, he asked them, "Who do crowds say that I am?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others that one of the prophets of long ago has come back to life." "But what about you?" he asked. "Who do you say that I am?" Peter answered, "God's Messiah." Okay, what did Peter have in mind? Lord, are you going to restore the kingdom of Israel? Jesus, isn't this the shape your work needs to take? And again, as I've said many times, the script was quite well written, and you can find a whole variety of Jewish uprisings in the first century where you gather disciples, you get them swords, you maybe take a town, you build your following, maybe you take a walled city, you kill some garrisons one by one by one, you clean out the Romans from the land, and then you keep marching. Alexander the Great. The Romans, everybody knew how this was done. And, well, maybe you have some sly way of starting, and, well, Jesus seems to have all this power. If you can raise the dead with a word, you can make dead with a word. If you can still the storm with a word, you can create a storm with a word. And how often in the ancient world didn't storms kill ships and win battles for people? Didn't we see all of these stories from the Old Testament where God's soldiers and armies would come down and fight for them? This is what messiahs do. And, well, when the mother of James and John say, well, will my sons be your lieutenants? What is Jesus' answer to her? Can they drink from the same cup? What cup will Jesus be drinking from? This is not the path of Messiah, what Jesus lays out, because Peter says, you're the Messiah. And then Jesus says, okay, I'm going to tell you the plan. Jesus strictly warned them not to tell this to anyone, that he was the Messiah, because once they'd say he's the Messiah, off this goes in their mind about what he's going to do. And then he tells them exactly what will happen. The Son of Man, oh, you mean that figure from Daniel 7 who inherits an eternal kingdom? Yeah, him. The Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and he must be killed and on the third day be raised to life. Now, if someone were to tell you that, at that point, he probably would have been excused from service in the new revolution, because this is not a formula for success. And that raised to life business, well, we just don't even hear that. What on earth do you mean? We don't like our messiahs crucified. And in fact, I'm told, and I may be wrong, I'm waiting for someone to correct me on this, which often happens now that I talk to a far larger audience. Islam today, from what I understand, continues to maintain that Jesus did not die on a cross because God would not let such a great prophet meet such a fate. Christians believe he did. Christians believe this thing that Jesus laid out, this is what happened. And then Jesus goes on. Then he said to them all, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me. Now, a real Messiah would have said, take up their sword daily and follow me in using it. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will save it. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world and yet lose or forfeit their very self? Whoever is ashamed of me and my words, the Son of Man will be ashamed of them when he comes in his glory and the glory of the Father and the holy angels. And they're thinking, oh, maybe that's when it happens. Well, yeah. Truly, I tell you, some of you standing here will not taste death before they see the kingdom of God. Some of you, maybe 3 of the 12? Are we going to go someplace special? Is there going to be light? Is there going to be booths? Now, Luke 9:28 starts off again with prayer. And it's interesting that Luke and not Matthew and Mark picks up on this. About 8 days after Jesus said this, he took Peter, John, and James with him and went up into a mountain to pray. As he was praying, the appearance of his face changed, and his clothes became as bright as a flash of lightning. You've all seen that. 2 men, Moses and Elijah, appeared in glorious splendor, talking with Jesus. They spoke about his departure. And again, this is interesting in Luke because the Greek word is exodus. They spoke about his exodus. Jesus is about to have an exodus. Is Jesus going to lead? Wait, we're in the promised land. What kind of exodus will Jesus lead? Will there be plagues? Is this kind of messiahship, which he was about to bring to fulfillment at Jerusalem? How would that look? What would that be? Now, Moses, of course, led the first Exodus and was the giver of the law. And Elijah, well, some people thought Jesus was Elijah already. And last week when we looked at him healing the servant of the centurion, we thought about Elisha and Naaman. I'm going to make sure I get my Old Testament villains correct. The Syrian general. And Elijah didn't die. He was brought into heaven in a chariot of fire. So, and some believed Moses ascended as well. So makes sense. Jesus is there with the law and the prophets. Peter and his companions were very sleepy. And again, this is unique to Luke, which is very interesting. But they became fully awake. And I don't think this is really just about sleepiness or awakeness. I think this is about the revelation that somehow they saw something at this moment. The curtain was pulled back and they saw his glory and the 2 men standing with him. And at this point, he sees. This is not a vision. This is real. He sees Jesus' glory. Now, what is this story about? Often during the week, I make my one rough draft, which I'm making right now, and I'm going to say this in my sermon about, on my way to Sunday to try to figure out, to have a practice run at the sermon, which I find helpful. But I sort of had 2 this week because one of the things that I had to deal with is the way that the story of the transfiguration is heard differently today than it was through most of church history. And one of the best people to look at this is one of the people that I know who was most adept at the ancient world, which was C.S. Lewis. And C.S. Lewis, who had given up Christianity and was a rather angry militant atheist until his conversion back into Christianity, but then now as an adult who had embraced it, had to figure all these things out. And in his sermon, The Weight of Glory, he writes about this. Well, what on earth is this glory and what does it mean? And everyone sort of intuitively understood it, but this is what he wrote in his sermon, The Weight of Glory. I turn next to the idea of glory. There's no getting away from the fact that this idea is very prominent in the New Testament and in early Christian writings. Salvation is constantly associated with palms, crowds, white robes, thrones, and splendor like the sun and the stars. All this makes no immediate appeal to me at all. And in that respect, I fancy I'm a typical modern. Glory suggests two ideas to me, of which one seems wicked and the other ridiculous. Either glory means to me fame, or it means luminosity. As for the first, since to be famous means to be better known than other people, the desire for fame appears to me to be a competitive passion and therefore of hell rather than of heaven. For the second, who wishes to become a kind of living electric light bulb? Here's Jesus shining. What does it mean? Now, if you want to read into this, I highly recommend C.S. Lewis's sermon, The Weight of Glory, because he will in fact address both of these and address both of them quite well. But I'm not going to read the rest of it for you today, and you should read it yourself. But we should pause there to note that I think Lewis is like the rest of us. Now, again, as I posted sort of the preliminary rough draft this week, people often then would say, well, I know what the transfiguration is about, and they would tell me what it was about, and they pretty much followed typical Christian theology, which is all fine and good. But what's interesting is that prior to the early part of the 19th century, nobody felt the need to explain this story. Everybody understood what it meant. And in the International Standard Bible Encyclopedia, that comes through. The Transfiguration belongs to the most difficult gospel materials. I don't think an ancient person would have said that, which includes the account of Jesus' baptism and temptations. See, what we find difficult is a function of the culture that we're immersed in. All three incidences involve the person of our Lord in a way that provides a unique glimpse into the cosmic proportions of his life and work. And that's absolutely correct. That's what these do. But why aren't they intuitive to us? Why don't we see this sort of intuitively, instinctively, like probably most people throughout church history have seen it? Neither the Apostolic Fathers nor the second century apologists in their available works even refer to it. I think it was just obvious to them. A few people mentioned it, and it showed up in sermons that basically worked through the Bible, but everyone just sort of understood what this meant. No explanation necessary. And what's interesting is that the explanations all begin in the modern period. Not until the beginning of the 19th century were attempts made to explain the event comprehensively. And then they have sort of 5 ideas. The first, that it's an atmospheric phenomenon because we need to have sort of natural causes to explain this phenomenon where Jesus is glowing like a light bulb or like the lightning. A psychological phenomenon. Or maybe it was something that was happening. Did the disciples eat something wrong or take a psychedelic? Or 3, as a bit of community theology. Oh, church community theology. This was a story they made up to mythologically embody something. Or 4, as a literary creation, kind of the same point. And then 5th, because, well, we're in the midst of the modernist fundamentalist fight. No, it really happened. Okay, but what does it mean? Jesus shines. Well, apparently, I think Peter, James, and John understood, but it was one of those experiences that was hard to talk about. As the men were leaving, Elijah and Moses, Peter said to them, Master, it is good for us to be here. Let us put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. He did not know what he was saying. And I think this is basically heaven and earth have met. And remember, when that happens for Jacob's ladder, he decides to put up an altar. And let's put up temples. Because this is sort of, and temples are in some ways portals. They're portals to the other world, and this must be a portal. Now this happens on a mountain, and this is a theophany, and so, but he knew it, might not be able to articulate it, but it was a frame of reference for him. While he was speaking, a cloud appeared. Oh, Now we have more. What clouds? Well, Jesus ascends on a cloud. A cloud goes with them in the desert and follows them along. God speaks from the cloud. This is heaven. This is a portal experience. The veil between us and the divine is pierced, and God pulls back the clouds. It's the only language we have, and well, he speaks directly, like from Sinai, like at the baptism. And remember that Isby said this is like the temptations and baptism. We don't know what to do with these stories. A voice came from the cloud saying, "This is my son, whom I have chosen. Listen to him. This is my prince. This is my representative. Listen to him." When the voice had spoken, they found that Jesus was alone. His disciples kept this to themselves and did not tell anyone what they had seen, probably because they struggled to. And actually, in some ways, we find this type of thing in the resurrection, because as N.T. Wright, a New Testament scholar, notes, the strangest things about the post-resurrection accounts is the fact that they're not embroidered. What does N.T. Wright mean about that? People put up temples and churches and shrines and altars after they have something like this, partly because they don't know what else to do. They don't know how to describe it. They don't have a frame of reference. Something has happened, but the symbolism is abundantly clear. The symbolism is light, but what does light mean? Well, again, this isn't, if we put it in sort of prosaic theological terms, it's not a difficult message for us to understand, sort of theoretically. Jesus is the king of the world, not just Israel. Jesus is God's own son. We should listen to him. It's very straightforward. And in fact, this story isn't found in the Gospel of John. And I think part of the reason it isn't is because the idea is conveyed in other means. When Jesus says, "I am, ego eimi, the great I am the light of the world." It's right there, about as plain a text as you could imagine. Now, we don't often think about light because, well, light is now so abundant. But before, really, the 19th century, if you wanted to have light, you needed a candle or a fire. In the ancient world, you needed a lamp or a torch. The two things that light were made by, well, it was lightning, which was sort of fire from heaven. And, well, you say, no, lightning's electricity. Yeah, but before Ben Franklin, because when lightning would come down and strike the earth, what did it leave? Fire. And God shows up as a burning bush. God says he's a consuming fire. So you have all this imagery. And so the imagery holds, but our experience with technology and electric light bulbs has sort of changed us. And so one of the people noted why there's all this, I often have a strain when people talk to me now. You in YouTube land do, but people in church don't. When people in church talk to me, I'm just Paul. I'm just a local pastor. But on YouTube, I'm a being of light. And we have these Hollywood stars. Why do we call them stars? Well, we navigate by them, and they shine like the sun, and they're beautiful, and we follow them. But the funny thing about light is we might see lights, but we don't see light. We see with light. We see when there's light, and light helps us see everything that's in the room. And that, I think, is a great part of the point, because the world really is dark. Well, what does that mean? Well, it's sort of like matter is dark. It's meaningless until the Logos comes and explains, or the light comes. And again, if you look at the prologue of the Gospel of John, the light has come into the world. Jesus is Logos. Jesus is light. They both come together. And again, all of this is throughout the whole Gospel of John. And so this story is in that sense refracted all the way out through the entire Gospel of John. Now, the problem is we don't feel this story intuitively. The symbolic world that much of the world has lived with has sort of been destroyed by the modern world. And so we don't intuitively get this passage like ancients do. It's a curiosity. We don't understand it. We're culturally removed from it. And so then we have a whole bunch of theological language that explains it to us, but it's sort of like you've watched the best movie in the world, and now you meet someone who hasn't seen it, and they say, tell me about it. And you know, just by talking about it, it's not going to have the same impact that seeing the movie had. The disciples don't want to say anything, because anything that they say to explain it wouldn't be like what it was from the inside. Yet the path of discipleship, and this is the strange thing, remains. This story comes right on the heels of Jesus warning them he would be betrayed, he would be killed, and he would rise from the dead. But nobody had a frame of reference as to what that would mean. And the way that story gets played out in our world today is deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me. And if you try to save your life, you'll lose it. And if you lose your life for my sake, you'll find it. And this exactly is the strangeness of Jesus, because, well, they wanted him to be a Messiah. And if he was a regular Messiah, well, maybe he would lead armies. But no. Okay, well, maybe you'll, just drop into Jerusalem and do the whole light bulb thing. Maybe then what? If they all fear you in that way, or you kill them, or they run from you, or they just grovel, and when you're there shining on them, they'll be your little minions, but the minute the light goes off, that's all the way the world works. And Jesus works so differently. Now, this week I really had the privilege of doing questions and answers for atheists only. I always do a question and answer time on Friday for people who gather in the Bridges of Meaning Discord server, and it's usually a great time to talk about, they have questions about the Bible and questions about the Christian life. And this week with the atheists, it was, I really enjoy the atheist questions because they challenge me. Church people, well, you're a pastor, so we'll be nice to you. That's not really true. But the atheists are challenging, and they want to ask hard questions, and they sincerely, and they're not necessarily going to believe anything that I say. And fair enough. I'm not coming as a being of light to them. But it's the strangeness in Jesus that continues to make him compelling. Because the Son of God, who God in the cloud says we should listen to, would come to rescue us not by bowling us over with the brilliance of his lightning look, but coming and being the servant of all, and dying the most humiliating death possible, the most loser death imaginable in that world then. And somehow we recognize that this is the Creator God. Why? Well, it's built into creation. Every mother gives life at the risk of her own. Every parent raises a child at the cost of their own life and energy. It's this kind of substitution, this kind of emptying that gives life. It's this agape. It's this one love to another that somehow doesn't just, cause us to put on sunglasses or run away or grovel and do what they say as long as he's shining on us, but to inspire us to actually be like him. And to change the world from the inside out, not the outside in. The Gospel of John, this is all sort of put together at once. Jesus is the light of the world, and the second half of the book is the book of glory. And you'd think, how can there be anything so opposite of glory as to Jesus' humiliating death on a cross, and even the sky complies, and darkness descends on the land? And John says, there it is. You say, what? There it is, the difference. I'm the Messiah. Watch me. Shine. Oh, we don't know what to say. Humiliated, crucified, risen from the dead. A new world begins. And we see this today. Christians shine most when they do as their master did, not by being a light bulb, but by being a servant. When they give themselves in love, even for those who hardly know the story. This is the last Sunday before we head into Lent.